I never thought my father's funeral would be the day everything changed. 6 years after I walked away from my family, I stood at the back of the church, watching as they lowered the casket of a man who had chosen my brother over me at every turn. The same brother who had stood on that graduation stage and told everyone who would listen that I was nothing. Nothing but a placeholder, a disappointment, someone who would never measure up to the Callahan family name. Boston winters are cruel, but nothing compared to the ice in my veins as I watched my brother James deliver the eulogy. His voice cracked with emotion, the golden sun mourning his greatest champion. No one noticed me slip into the back row. I wasn't expected to show up, not after what happened at Northeastern's graduation ceremony all those years ago. But then came the reading of the will. The family attorney's eyes found mine across the room, and something in his expression made my heart stop. To my daughter, Catherine, who deserved better than what I gave her, I leave everything. The gasps echoed through the room as James's face drained of color. Dad had known the truth all along, and now everyone else would too. Growing up in Brookline, Massachusetts, the Callahan family had a reputation to uphold. My father, Richard Callahan, was a respected surgeon at Massachusetts General, and our colonial-style home with its manicured lawn was the setting for regular Sunday dinners where appearance was everything. My mother had passed when I was 8, breast cancer that moved too quickly, leaving Dad to raise James and me on his own. James was the firstborn, older by 3 years, and in Dad's eyes, he could do no wrong. Captain of the hockey team, straight-A student, headed for medical school just like Dad. The Callahan legacy would continue. Meanwhile, I gravitated toward art and literature, interests that my father tolerated but never celebrated. "Catherine," he'd say, examining my report card, "these are fine grades, but they won't get you into Harvard Medical." It wasn't a suggestion. In our family, it was an expectation. I remember my 16th birthday when James received more attention than I did. Dad had gotten him a new laptop to help with college applications, while I unwrapped a generic journal. "For your little stories," Dad explained, not unkindly but dismissively. "Catherine," he'd say, examining my report card, "these are fine grades, but they won't get you into Harvard Medical." It wasn't a suggestion. In our family, it was an expectation. I remember my 16th birthday when James received more attention than I did. Dad had gotten him a new laptop to help with college applications, while I unwrapped a generic journal. "For your little stories," Dad explained, not unkindly but dismissively. That night, I overheard them talking in Dad's study, the heavy oak door not quite closed. "She lacks ambition, James. Not like you. I worry what will become of her." The summer before my senior year, things escalated. I'd been accepted to Northeastern's journalism program with a partial scholarship. Not Harvard Medical, but something I was proud of. At dinner, I excitedly shared the news. Dad offered a tight smile, but James snorted. "Journalism? Why not just work at Dunkin' Donuts and save the tuition?" Dad didn't correct him, just poured more wine and changed the subject to James's research position. What they didn't know was that I had started interning at the Boston Globe. My professor had submitted one of my investigative pieces, and they'd taken me on. I was assigned to the healthcare beat, ironically covering the same world my father and brother inhabited, but from the outside. It was there I discovered something that would change everything. While researching a story on medical ethics violations, I came across familiar names, patients from Dad's practice who had been part of experimental procedures that hadn't been properly approved. Dad's signature was on documentation that shouldn't exist. Further digging revealed James had helped cover it up, using his position as a research assistant to alter data. The prestigious Callahan name had a shadow side. I kept the file, unsure what to do with it. Part of me hoped I was wrong, that there was an explanation, but the evidence was damning. Meanwhile, Dad had promised James his grandfather's vintage Rolex watch, a family heirloom, upon graduation from medical school. It was the ultimate symbol of Callahan's success, passed down through generations of doctors. "It's for the Callahan who carries on the legacy," Dad would say. The implication clear. Throughout those months, I threw myself into my schoolwork and the Globe internship, pulling further away from family dinners and traditions. The distance grew, especially with James, who seemed to take pleasure in diminishing my achievements. "A byline in the school paper? Adorable," he'd say, as Dad nodded along. They never asked to read my work, never knew I was already building a career while they assumed I was just playing at one. By the time graduation approached, the file of evidence had grown thicker, and my resolve stronger. I had uncovered enough to warrant a full investigation. Patient harm, falsified results, millions in research grants obtained through deception. Dad and James had created a house of cards, and I held the match. But I still hesitated, caught between family loyalty and the truth. Northeastern's graduation ceremony fell on a perfect May morning, the kind of New England spring day where everything feels possible. I'd graduated summa cum laude, something even Dad couldn't dismiss. He had actually smiled when I told him, though he quickly pivoted to James's upcoming medical school graduation. "That's when the real celebration will be," he'd said. Still, they were coming to my ceremony. Dad had even made reservations at Yvonne's, one of Boston's most exclusive restaurants. For once, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this would be my day. I spotted them in the audience as I took my seat among my fellow graduates. Dad in his tailored navy suit, looking distinguished with silver at his temples. James beside him, checking his phone with apparent boredom. Neither waved when they saw me looking, but Dad gave a small nod. It was something. The commencement speaker was a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, someone I admired enormously. As she spoke about truth and integrity, the file of documents felt heavy in my apartment across town. I had decided not to bring it today. Today wasn't about exposures or confrontations. It was supposed to be about celebration. When they called my name as one of the honors graduates, I heard a smattering of applause. Looking out, I saw my professors clapping enthusiastically, my friends cheering. Dad and James offered perfunctory applause. I tried not to let it sting as I crossed the stage, shaking hands with the university president. What I didn't know was that James had been drinking since breakfast. Later, I'd learn he'd received news that morning that his research fellowship, the prestigious one he'd been counting on, had fallen through. Someone had anonymously submitted questions about his previous research integrity. It wasn't me. I hadn't moved on my evidence yet. But in his mind, it could only have been his meddling sister. After the ceremony, families gathered on the quad for photos and congratulations. Dad actually put his arm around me for a picture. "Not bad, Catherine," he said, which from him was effusive praise. I felt a flutter of hope. Then my advisor approached, excited to share news. "Catherine, the editor called. They're running your expo next week, front page of the Sunday section. They're already talking spotlight team potential." Dad's arm dropped from my shoulder. "What expo?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharp. Before I could answer, my advisor continued. "Her investigation into medical research fraud. Absolutely brilliant work. You must be so proud." I watched Dad's expression harden, the momentary warmth vanishing. I wasn't aware Catherine was working on anything so ambitious. James stepped forward then, his movements slightly unsteady. I smelled the bourbon on his breath as he got close to my face. "What exactly have you been investigating, Katie?" The childhood nickname came out as a sneer. "Not now," I whispered, seeing other families watching. "We can discuss this at dinner." "No," James said, his voice rising. "I want to know what little Katie's been up to. Playing reporter? Digging up dirt? On who exactly?" Dad put a hand on his arm. "James, this isn't the place." But James shook him off. Color was high on his cheeks as he turned to face the small crowd that had gathered. My friends, my professors, other families, all watching now. You all think she's so impressive with her honors and her little newspaper stories, he announced, gesturing wildly toward me. Let me tell you about Catherine Callahan. She's nothing, nothing, just a jealous little girl who couldn't measure up, so she decided to tear down her family instead. The quad fell silent. My advisor stepped back, confusion on her face. Dad stood frozen, his eyes darting between us and the onlookers. James, Dad finally said, that's enough. But it wasn't enough for James. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper that somehow carried in the silence. You think you found something, don't you? You think your little investigation matters? You're nothing but a footnote in this family, Catherine. Always have been, always will be. Then he turned to our father. Are we really going to dinner to celebrate this betrayal? I looked at my father, waiting. One word from him, just one word in my defense, was all I needed. Dad checked his watch. Perhaps it would be best to reschedule, given the circumstances. James needs to calm down. He wouldn't meet my eyes. We'll talk about this article of yours another time. In that moment, something broke inside me. 6 years of journalism training had taught me to recognize when I had all the evidence I needed. I had my answer. Without a word, I turned and walked away from them, from that quad, from the Callahan family. Behind me, I heard James's mocking laughter. I never made it to Yvonne's that night. Instead, I went straight to the Globe offices and finalized my story for publication. The next day, I put in for a transfer to their Washington bureau. By the time the story broke wide open the following Sunday, I was already gone. The story hit like a hurricane. Renowned Boston surgeon and son implicated in research fraud splashed across the Sunday Globe. By Monday, it was national news. I watched it unfold from my new apartment in D.C., feeling hollow rather than victorious. I had done my job as a journalist, but I had lost my family in the process. The investigation moved quickly after that. Massachusetts Medical Board, FDA, federal prosecutors all descended on my father's practice. James's medical school placed him on probation pending investigation. Neither of them tried to contact me, though I received a brief email from Dad's lawyer asking if I would reconsider my position before irreparable damage was done. I didn't respond. The evidence spoke for itself. 6 years passed. I built a new life and a respected career in Washington. My investigative work earned awards, and I found a surrogate family in my colleagues and friends. Boston became a place I used to be from. The Callahans, people I used to know. I dated, made a home, adopted a rescue dog named Hemingway. I convinced myself I had moved on. Then came the call about my father's death. Sudden heart attack at his Brookline home, the family lawyer informed me. The funeral would be Saturday. Your father amended his will recently, he added before hanging up. He requested your presence at the reading. I almost didn't go. What was left to say? But something pulled me back to Boston, to that Gothic stone church where Callahans had marked life's milestones for generations. I slipped into the back row as James began his eulogy, watching as he painted a portrait of a great man, a healer, a father beyond reproach. The pews were half empty, a testament to how far the mighty had fallen. The medical fraud case had ended in a settlement, but Dad's career and reputation never recovered. He had been forced to retire, his name removed from the hospital wing he had once helped fund. My father was a man of principles, James declared from the pulpit, his voice breaking. A man who taught me that family comes first, that the Callahan name stands for excellence and integrity. I couldn't help it. A short, harsh laugh escaped me. Heads turned. James faltered, then saw me. His face contorted with rage. You, he hissed into the microphone. You dare show up here? I stayed seated, calm in the storm I knew was coming. "My sister," he announced to the congregation, gesturing wildly toward me. "The one who betrayed her family for a byline. The one who wasn't there when Dad's health declined, when his heart weakened. Where were you, Catherine? Writing more exposés while your father died alone?" The remaining mourners murmured uncomfortably. James's wife tugged at his sleeve, trying to guide him back to his seat, but he shook her off. "She thinks she can just walk in here after 6 years and what? Pay her respects? There's nothing respectful about you, Catherine. Nothing loyal, nothing worthy of the Callahan name." I stood then, steady and determined. 6 years had changed me. I wasn't the hurt young graduate anymore. I was a woman who had found her strength. "I came because he was my father too, James," I said, my voice carrying in the hushed church, "and because, unlike you, I have nothing to hide." That's when the family attorney stepped forward from the front pew. "Perhaps this would be an appropriate time for the reading of the will," he suggested, his voice cutting through the tension. We gathered in the church's small side chapel after the other mourners had dispersed for the reception. Just James, his wife, me, and the attorney with his leather portfolio. "The last will and testament of Richard Edward Callahan," the attorney began, his voice formal. Standard preliminaries followed until he reached the meat of it. "To my son, James Callahan, I leave the sum of $1,000. James's face went slack with shock. "That's impossible," he stammered. "There must be millions. The house, the investments." The attorney continued as if he hadn't spoken. "To my daughter, Catherine Callahan, I leave the remainder of my estate, including the family home, all investments and personal effects, with the following message. Catherine, you were never nothing. You were the only one brave enough to tell the truth. Your mother would have been proud." The room went silent. Then James lunged across the table, his face contorted. "You did this! Somehow you manipulated him!" "The will was changed 3 years ago," the attorney said calmly. "After your father's private investigation confirmed the full extent of the research violations and your central role in them, James, violations Catherine didn't even know about when she wrote her article." I sat frozen, my father's posthumous words ringing in my ears. 6 years of anger and hurt collided with this unexpected vindication. "One more thing," the attorney said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet box and slid it across the table to me. "Your father wanted you to have this specifically." Inside was the Callahan Rolex, the symbol of legacy, of belonging, the watch that was supposed to go to James, to the heir who would carry on the Callahan medical tradition. James saw it, and something in him broke. "No," he whispered, "not that. Dad promised." "He left you one more message, Catherine," the attorney said, ignoring James's distress. "The legacy of our family isn't in medicine, it's in truth. You're the Callahan who understood that." I closed the box, stood, and walked out, leaving James shouting behind me, his voice echoing through the empty church. Outside, snow had begun to fall on Boston, covering everything in clean, forgiving white. The aftermath of the will reading was chaos. James threatened litigation, claiming Dad had been manipulated or lacked capacity when he changed his will. His attorney sent formal letters, made thinly veiled threats. None of it stuck. Dad's amendment had been properly witnessed, notarized, and included a letter explaining his decision in painstaking detail. I stayed in Boston longer than planned, taking a leave from the Post to sort through the house. Each room held memories, some painful, some unexpectedly tender. In Dad's study, I found a folder labeled simply Catherine, containing clippings of every article I'd ever published, from the Northeastern student paper to my recent Polk Award-winning series. He'd been following my career all along, silently. More surprising were the journals I found hidden in a false bottom drawer of his desk. Years of entries documenting his growing suspicion of James's research misconduct, his initial denial, then the slow, painful acceptance of the truth. The last entries revealed his struggle with whether to contact me, his pride warring with his shame. One entry, dated about 3 years after I left, read, "Catherine was right. I've hired a private investigator to determine the full extent of the damage. Initial findings suggest James was more deeply involved than even her article indicated. How did I fail them both so completely?" I was sitting on the floor of the study, surrounded by these journals, when there was a knock at the door. It was Sarah, James's wife, now soon-to-be ex-wife, as she quickly informed me. "I'm filing for divorce," she said, accepting the tea I offered. We sat in the kitchen, two strangers connected by the wreckage of the Callahan family. "James has been unraveling since your father changed the will. The drinking is worse. I had to get our son away from it. I hadn't known they had a child, a nephew I'd never met. His name is Richard," she said, showing me a picture on her phone of a solemn 5-year-old with the Callahan eyes. "But we call him Ricky." "He looks like Mom," I said softly, seeing the resemblance to old photos. Sarah hesitated, then pushed an envelope across the table. "James doesn't know I'm here, but your father gave me this before he died, made me promise to deliver it if things went the way he expected." Inside was a letter, Dad's precise handwriting filling the page. "Catherine, by now you know my decision regarding the estate. What you may not know is that I began to see the truth long before my health failed. Your article forced me to confront what I had enabled in James and what I had denied in you. The investigation that followed revealed even worse violations than you reported. I was wrong, terribly wrong, to dismiss you. Wrong to favor James because he followed the path I chose. Wrong to miss the strength and integrity you possessed that he lacked. I have watched your career from afar, too proud and ashamed to reach out, but know that I have seen you become the best of us. There is one thing left to tell you. Your mother made me promise on her deathbed to protect both her children equally. Don't let Richard become just a doctor's legacy," she said. "Let him be a father first. I failed her in this, as I failed you. James will not accept his role in what happened, but his son deserves better. Your nephew deserves to know his aunt. If you can find it in yourself to offer that connection despite everything. The Callahan name means something different now because of you, something better. With love and regret, Dad." Sarah watched me fold the letter carefully. "He wanted you to know Ricky," she said. "And honestly, I could use the help. James he's not a reliable presence these days." "I'd like to meet him," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. The next day, I met my nephew at a playground in Cambridge. He was cautious at first, studying me with serious eyes. "Are you really my aunt?" he asked, suspicion in his voice. "I really am," I confirmed, "and I'm sorry I haven't been around before now." He considered this. "Dad says you're the reason Grandpa gave away his money." I took a deep breath. "Your grandpa made his own decisions. Grown-up stuff is complicated." "Dad drinks special juice and gets mad," Ricky said, matter-of-factly, pushing his glasses up his nose with one finger. "Mom says we need space from the mad." "That seems smart," I agreed. "Sometimes people need space to figure things out." He studied me again, then offered me half of his soft pretzel, a peace offering. "Do you like dinosaurs? I know lots about dinosaurs." And just like that, I had a new Callahan in my life. Over the following months, I made arrangements to work remotely between DC and Boston. The Post was surprisingly accommodating when I explained the situation. The Callahan house, my house now, was too full of ghosts to live in, so I donated it to a nonprofit that converted it into a transitional home for medical patients and their families. The irony wasn't lost on me. James refused my attempts at reconciliation. The last time I saw him was at the courthouse when his medical license was permanently revoked following new evidence that emerged from Dad's private investigation. He wouldn't look at me, but I heard him tell his attorney, "She got what she wanted, the golden child now." But that wasn't what I wanted, never had been. What I did want was building slowly, a relationship with my nephew who was smart and curious and loved to read, a fragile friendship with Sarah who was rebuilding her life, peace with my father's complicated legacy, and finally, a sense that the Callahan name could mean something worthy again. 6 months after Dad's funeral, I received a small package at my DC apartment. Inside was the key to a safe deposit box with a note from the family attorney. The box contained only one item, Mom's engagement ring, which I'd thought was buried with her. With it was a note in Dad's handwriting. "She wanted you to have this. I should have given it to you years ago. Some legacies aren't about names or professions, they're about love. This is your mother's legacy to you." I wore the ring on a chain around my neck the day I took Ricky to his first Red Sox game at Fenway, a Callahan tradition Dad had only ever shared with James. As we sat eating overpriced hot dogs in the summer sun, Ricky leaned against me contentedly. "Aunt Katie," he said, using the nickname I once hated but now sounded different in his innocent voice, "are you going to stay? Not just visiting, but stay?" I looked at his hopeful face and felt something settle in my chest. "I'm thinking about it," I told him honestly. "Would you like that?" He nodded vigorously. "Mom says you tell the truth even when it's hard. I want to learn how to do that too." In that moment, sitting in Fenway Park with my nephew, I realized Dad's final gift wasn't the house or the money or even Mom's ring. It was the chance to redefine what it meant to be a Callahan, not through medicine or prestige, but through truth and connection. The chance to be something rather than nothing on my own terms. The Rolex stayed in its box, unworn. Some symbols of the past are better left there, but the future, that was something I was finally ready to claim. It's been 2 years since that snowy funeral day in Boston. I've settled into a new rhythm, splitting my time between Washington and a small apartment near Harvard Square. Ricky spends weekends with me during the school year and 2 weeks each summer. We're building our own traditions, Saturday morning pancakes, museum adventures, and yes, Red Sox games whenever possible. James finally entered rehab last winter. We've exchanged a few cautious emails. There's no forgiveness yet, but there is acknowledgement, which feels like a first step on a very long road. Sometimes I take out Dad's journals and read them, trying to understand the complicated man who was my father. I've come to realize that we're all capable of both terrible mistakes and meaningful redemption. The Callahan legacy isn't perfect. It's messy and flawed, just like family itself. That day at graduation, when James shouted that I was nothing, he couldn't have known he was actually setting me free. Free to define myself on my own terms, to build a life based on truth rather than expectations. If there's anything I've learned from this journey, it's that family isn't always who you're born to. Sometimes it's who you choose to become for each other. And sometimes the greatest act of love is telling the truth, even when it costs you everything. I still have the Rolex. I'm saving it for Ricky when he's older, along with the story of our family. Not the sanitized version, but the real one, with all its complications and redemptions. Because the truth, however difficult, is always worth telling. If you've stayed with me through this story, maybe you have your own complicated family tale. Remember that your worth isn't defined by others' limitations or expectations. Sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do, and sometimes coming back on your own terms is even braver. If this resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about family, truth, and finding your own path. Share your experiences in the comments below. I read everyone. Until next time, this is Catherine Callahan, signing off.